Well, tell me, mama, what's going on? Tell me, darling, what's going on? I'm going back.
Welcome back, everybody. The Bacon and Egg Show, episode 65, October 17th, 2021. Oh, Jay, is it basketball season yet?
Oh, let me check. Almost November 9th, and we'll be there. But it is not basketball season yet. It's actually clobbering time. And it's not because the Longhorns are doing the ones that aren't the ones that are clobbering. That was something yesterday, man. But first, how are you? You everything all right?
Yeah, man. I mean, weather's great.
Yeah.
Get to live in Austin, Texas, and eat some good food, and
Oh,
everything
yeah.
else is fantastic except for that. We talk about positive sports experiences. Whatever yesterday was about as polar opposite of a positive sports experience, at least for me and you, across the
Mhm.
board.
Yeah.
Um, I think after whatever happened at DKR Texas Memorial Stadium yesterday, I get home and I flip on the Astros game in the first inning, and that didn't last very long. That one was switched off pretty quickly, but
Yep.
they made a game of it later on, but still. And then Austin FC, standard evening closeout of the non-PSE experience. So um, so here we are. I don't think we're going to hit much on Austin FC today. This is a team kind of rolling out. Well, we'll kind of mention that here in our cup of coffee. They're a team kind of seeing out the end of the season.
Yeah.
It is what it is. Copa Tejas is still in place. We'll see if they can make anything of that, but we'll get to that when that time comes. But let's talk about. I mean, let's just get right into it. Is Texas back this week?
Damn it. There is one thing that's back, and it's a Texas Longhorn football team not making adjustments at halftime and being severely outcoached in crunch time. And maybe just even not even if you want to say crunch time, but basically anytime after halftime, Texas was outcoached, out schemed, outmaneuvered. And it's easy for that to happen when it feels like literally no adjustments were made after the half. And that's what's back for me, man. Where to
Did it
start
ever
on this?
leave?
Yeah, I mean that again, it's a come out guns ablazing. Even okay, so first half you come out and you look like, okay, this scheme what we have going on is gonna scheme some guys open, gonna try to hide some inefficiencies, gonna try to put guys into the best positions to be successful, see what happens. And it works. It's obvious that there is a clear plan going into a game, Kerry. But after that, and aside from the first drive of the second half, it looked, I don't want to say embarrassing, but it was troubling to watch the way that this game unfolded yesterday for me.
I think embarrassing is a fair word, to be honest, with the way that it played out. I mean, we're not going to get too much into the stats because for the second week in a row, if you look at the stats as a whole, it doesn't really tell the entire story. Where 1 yard in the fourth quarter offensively is embarrassing. Like, there's no other way around that. It's interesting because as we're talking through this, and we've been texting about this and discussing this over the last, 18 hours, however it's been since the game ended. Like we talk about the adjustments at half. I do now that we're talking about it, I think there are adjustments. I just think they're the wrong ones. Because if they didn't make any adjustments, then that means that they're still playing the way that they played in the first half. It's almost like this team, and you made a great point. The game planning, the scripting for the beginning of the games, like that first drive to open up the game yesterday was a masterpiece. I mean, it was balanced, it was multiple, the way they just went right down the field, got a scoring drive, and it was like okay, talk about a way to rebound after what happened in Dallas last week. And then the defense started getting some stops. They were holding Oklahoma State to 3s instead of 7s. And it seemed like one of those games where, okay, nothing crazy was going on. Like, it wasn't the like kind of insanity of the game in the Cotton Bowl where that was just every kind of fluky or busted play kind of thing, jump ball like scenario happened. This just seemed like it was going to be a good, well contested football game until it gets to half. And is this just an issue of Sark looking at like we have a lead and like let's dial it back a little bit? Because I mean, to me, the game, like in the stadium, the play calling it seemed incredibly conservative, and I don't know how much of a like there's an execution factor in that, but it started to feel extremely conservative in the way of it was a playing not to lose mentality instead of going for the throat against at the time number 12 team in the country. They'll probably be top 10. That they should be top 10 this week. A chance to get a signature win on the season, and they were playing not to lose offensively.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I have this cup right here and it says all gas and no brakes on it, right? Doesn't seem like that's necessarily the philosophy, towards the end of the third and fourth quarters of some of these games, like you said. Now, I think that there's a pivotal point in this game that we'd be remiss to not discuss, which is the pick six that happened, because that's a flip from driving and going in and making that a 3-possession game going into half, basically, to now it's a 1-possession game going into half, and it's a completely different atmosphere that you're playing in at that point.
It sucked the air out of the building.
And we've discussed this we both believe, and it's pretty obvious, and I think most people watching that game would agree that Casey Thompson is not 100%. Casey Thompson already has his limitations as a quarterback. And then you pile on top of that his hand's all taped up and his thumb is probably still bothering him. And it adds to that. It adds to those limitations. And then
I think you're about to say exactly where I was going to go. So,
and then when you stare down the receiver that you're going to throw the ball to, this is not middle school, man. Like, you can't do that. These defenders are way too good to just stare it down. And with where your seats you were telling me a little bit ago how you just had that direct.
It was like he was throwing directly to us. You could read the thing from 32 rows up, man.
And like, you can't do that. And you especially can't do that in that situation when your team has a chance to really, I mean, honestly, if Texas scores there, it's a completely different ball game. Obviously, I mean, that without saying, with the score, it's a
14-point swing.
That sucks the life. Not only, instead of the life being sucked out of the stadium, it sucked out of that sideline for Oklahoma State. And we're talking about we're having a completely different conversation today. I feel, if that specific play, even if you get 3 points out of that drive, we're having a different conversation today about what this team looked like. And for whatever reason, when this Texas football team gets their back against the wall, it does look like, I 100% agree with you, that they're playing not to lose, that they're playing scared football, that they're coaching scared, and that all gas, no brakes mantra is thrown out the window, and you see a completely different team. It's very difficult for me to understand how a team can play so well for this amount of time, and then for this amount of time play so poorly.
It's a distinct marker too.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. And that's where, like, this is turning into a trend, as we've talked about this before the show. Like, this is turning into a trend. As we discussed last week, there were a lot of things that happened in Dallas that you can kind of go, bounce this way, bounce the other way, like all the fluky kind of circumstances. The ending's different. But now we're getting another, and as we also talked about before, like this almost happened in Fort Worth, where Texas had a chance to have a 3-score lead in the fourth quarter, didn't, and let TCU climb back into the game. And nearly, if it wasn't for Bijan hammering the door shut, nearly, who knows how that could have played out, but maybe a similar kind of scenario. But this is turning into a trend now where you could really say, like, 3 weeks in a row that whatever this coaching staff is doing in the second half is not working. And we'll get to kind of the coming, we'll get to the schedule ahead. This ain't it. Like, this is not going to work for the rest of the season with this, like, whatever this coaching mentality is coming out of halftime. Like, it needs to change, because Texas is not going to have big enough leads on some of these opponents later on in the season to basically just go, okay, just see this thing out. But real quick, we got a lot, we criticized Tom Herman a ton, rightfully so. But you never felt like, for one, they never got blown out under Tom Herman.
Nope.
And they seem to play, like, they never seem to fade physically or really even mentally throughout 4 quarters. Now, the execution wouldn't be there, and you can criticize the play calling and like those kinds of things, but you never felt like, and Texas oftentimes, a lot of times under Tom Herman, especially like against OU, last season, would climb their way back into games. They would fight their way back into games that they maybe had no business being in. This is essentially, minus a few players, the same group. It's like, how does it go from looking like a team that maybe they aren't being coached well, but they at least look physically conditioned and they're there for 4 quarters mentally, to now this, like, people are like, oh, well, maybe it's just the conditioning. They just can't physically go the 4 quarters. Well, how do you go from that to now just, I don't know if I buy that. I think this is coming down to coaching. And it's not because the players aren't in shape and they're not conditioned and all these. We've seen them do this. Like, we've seen the opposite of it from this team. I don't get it.
To me, there aren't winners on this team. And I'm not calling them losers, but I'm saying there aren't guys that know. Sam Ehlinger is a winner. His record at Texas under, as a starting quarterback, throw that out the window. The guy's a winner. And if he has the drive, he has the leadership, and once he gets his shot in the NFL, he'll win there too. He's the guy. There is no Sam Ehlinger type leader on this team right now. And I feel like when you have a guy at your quarterback position who is that much of a leader, who basically willed Texas to the wins that they got in spite of coaching, in spite of a lack of development around him, Sam Ehlinger, to me, is he might not be the only answer to your question, but he is one of the biggest answers to that question to me. And there is no leader on this football team right now. Bijan Robinson, for as great as he is, he's not that dude.
That's not him. And this is not meant as a slight to Casey. I don't think Casey's that guy either. I know, like, the players seem to like him and all those things, and we heard a lot about his leadership qualities and all those things, and it's a personality trait. So this isn't like a slight against anybody. This isn't to say that, like, this is not meant to be like, oh, well, but people criticize Hudson Card because of, like, he was a quiet guy, didn't really seem to have that leadership quality to him. Like, we haven't seen Casey Thompson, like, on the sideline yelling at guys like in Dallas and all those things to rally the troops and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't seem to be his personality either, to your point, and that there is no Sam Ehlinger type or a Vince Young type or, these kind of, like, you could even argue the same thing on the defensive side, like Overshone, best player on this defense. I mean, how often do we see him going nuts and kind of, you see it a little bit, but where are the leaders with this team that, despite whatever coaching, apprehension there might be with, like, putting games away, where are the players rallying and taking on that leadership role? I think that's a great point. I hadn't heard that mentioned at all with all this. And I think that's unfortunate kind of truth that we're looking at here.
And when you have guys that are leaders on the sidelines, you have to have those guys that are leading by example on the field.
Right.
And it's like, we're so surprised when Keandre Coburn gets a sack. Though finally the defensive line has started to live up to, that's not leading by example. That's
Doing what
when
you're
you have
supposed to do.
exactly. That's it. Yeah, bingo.
It's your job.
Yeah, and do your job, right? But there's so much inconsistency on this team right now. And that needs to be, and this is why, again, like, this is 2 weeks in a row now, I'm saying, like, don't jump off this bandwagon. Don't give up on Tom Herman yet. Let him establish. Oh my God.
Oh man.
Oh God.
Dude. I think you just sealed Sark's fate there.
We're living it again.
Time is a flat circle. .gif.
Everything we do or ever will done, we're gonna do
I need the
over
Lone
and
Star
over
cannon.
again. Oh God, don't give up on Steve Sarkisian yet. You might give up on me, but don't give up on Steve Sarkisian yet, because if this is gonna work, it's not gonna be with the guys on campus right now. And that's not, again, there's the lack of development, the lack of knowing how to win, the lack of leadership, on-field leadership that is currently in this locker room. And right now, it's like, don't give up on this yet. Do not jump off of this train yet. But some of these guys that are going to need to be around, I think Texas fans are going to need to swallow a hard pill here, that this team might lose a couple more games this season. Like, this is, I think they will. I thought this was an 8-win team coming into the season. It might not even be that good, to be honest, once this is all said and done. Some of these younger guys that are going to be here for a while, I feel like they need to see the field more. What is out there right now in terms of some of these upperclassmen, it's not doing this football program any favors at this point. I'm not saying that this is a totally lost season, and I'm not saying to throw in the towel, but I feel like some of these younger guys that are going to be here under Sarkisian are going to need to see what they have out of them in order to see, because going into next season, there can't just be a blank slate. To me, there has to be tape on some of these guys. And we saw a little bit of Hayden Connor yesterday. There was one play that sticks out. I've been waiting to see that guy get some more playing time, and he just totally whiffed, gave up a sack. But I need to see more of him. If he's not getting the on-field, the in-game reps, the real live action, because going up against this defensive line in practice, it ain't doing it. Like, this defensive line, to me, I feel like you could go across college football and pick a positional group on any given team, and this defensive line is one of the most underperforming, underachieving position groups in the country. In terms of production and overall play, and the Texas offensive line ain't far behind them. But the difference
between those two for me is that, let's take the underperforming, all those kinds of things out of it. If you looked at it from a pure preseason talent perspective, where the Texas defensive line is getting picked nationally is a whole hell of a lot different than where the Texas offensive line would be getting picked. For me, maybe the offensive line isn't necessarily underperforming because they're just not any good. We didn't have any good expectations for them coming into this season. We talked about, we're like, this is going to be a weakness for this team. And however they coach around it is going to determine the story for this offense. Where the defensive line, we were talking about, this was going to be one of the strengths of this, actually the strength of this defense, because we weren't high on the linebackers, and the secondary was a big question mark for us. We had questions about the edge, but this defensive line was supposed to be a real strength for this team, and one of the best ones in the conference, maybe just short of Oklahoma, and one of the better ones in the country. And they've completely, call it whatever you want.
They're
and that's where, like, for me, it's like, That's the most disappointing part. I can only be so disappointed about the offensive line when we knew this,
It's a fair point.
and on the Sark thing, about giving them, I'm not off the Sark train. Like, I think, but what worries me is this scheme, the second half game plan and the scheming. Like, if you can, even with those talent deficiencies, all those kinds of things that we're talking about on the offensive side of the ball, he schemes well enough to put points up in the first half. And this is what is gonna worry me, because I do think there's a couple losses left in this team this year, and they might come pretty quickly. There's a bye week, and then it's a trip to Waco against a Baylor team that doesn't look very bad. They're going to be back in the top 25 this week. A trip to Ames is not going to be an easy one. I think Texas, I picked them to win that game earlier this season. I don't know what to expect from this Texas team at this point on the road, but that's not going to be an easy game. K-State lurks towards the end of the season, when if this team has already hung another loss or two, that could be, a pretty miserable ending game for the season. And then the trip to Morgantown. This is not, I know West Virginia is not good. It's a trip to Morgantown. It's still going to be tricky, but
It'll probably be a night game.
yeah, before getting
just
probably another 11 a.m. kick for the way that it's going. But what worries me about this situation with Sark, though, is that if this was a case where, like we mentioned, like if they basically just kept the exact same play calling and the all gas, no breaks mantra going into the second half, and the players just weren't executing, fine. At least they're trying to still go for the throat and finish these games. That's an easier recruiting sell than the coaches saying, look at what Steve, opposing coaches recruiting wise saying, look at what Sarkisian does in the second half. There's a reason he's known as 7-win Steve amongst UW and USC fans. That's what's concerning to me, is that if they go 7-5 this year, and they have another couple games where they just completely collapse in the second half, that's one of the easiest, negative recruiting pitches that a coaching staff can put against them. And how do they combat and how do they negate that? I don't think they can. That's an argument that Sark can't really win. Where if you say, hey, look, we're still calling the same plays in the second half, but these guys that we're trying to recruit you to replace just aren't executing. That's a different story for me. And this season is so crucial in that regard, because whenever this SEC move does happen, like, Sark needs to set this foundation now. And if he doesn't haul in a good recruiting class this season, next year doesn't get any better. Bama comes to town. We already mentioned we were talking before the show about the UTSA Fighting Roadrunners. They come to town after Bama, and that's not going to be an easy game either if Jeff Traylor's still there. It doesn't get any easier for Sark. But he's not doing himself any favors with the second half coaching decisions. I just don't understand it.
And maybe.
Sorry, that was like a lot of like different factors piled into like one. Just
but
rant,
but it's all important. And maybe he is trying to figure this team out. Maybe Sark is trying to get a feel for what he has and put guys in different positions, because he knows at this point, it's a lost season already. Like if you beat Oklahoma, like, that's on a different trajectory. But for me, I feel like I'm trying to rationalize this, man. Like, I'm trying to come up with a reason that this like a game like yesterday would happen that is not completely negative. But it's hard to do that when you look at because again, we talk about talent comparisons, paper on paper, when you measure putting recruits against each other. There's no way that Oklahoma State has more talent than the University of Texas.
They don't.
And sometimes we misconstrue talent with development.
Right.
And when you have the lack of development of that talent, like there has been on this campus, and before we came on, Connor Williams came to my mind, who is playing pretty well for the Cowboys right now. And it's sort of taken him 4 years of being in a system at the pro level to really come into his own. When he was, he was a pretty high draft pick, not a first round pick, but he also wasn't a 7th round pick. Like he was regarded, I think it was a 2nd round pick.
Second rounder, yeah.
So you look at Connor Williams, and it's taken him 4 years to get coached up to a level to where his talent, his true talent, and his greatest ability is finally coming out. And to me, that's a great example of being in a system at the University of Texas where you're not being coached up to the level of your potential. You're just being coached. You're not being taught how to play football at a higher level. You're being coached, being taught to play football, which is what's happening right now when we see a quote from Tope Amade, who said in the last 3 or 4 months, he's made more strides than the last 4 or 5 years because he's being taught the game. That confidence is being instilled in him. And that is, to me, when I read it at first, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And the farther we get removed away from me reading that quote, the more pissed off I get thinking about it, that a guy like that who made his first start of his career yesterday and who played okay, there's a couple of things where you point and you're like, yeah, well, you can sort of see why he hasn't had a start in 5 years. But there's also some strong points to his game that if you're coached up and you have the confidence in yourself to pull it off, then you can do it and you're more likely to do it. And that's just, those are the Connor Williams and Amade things. Those are 2 guys on the offensive line. And we're not even talking about a Sam Cosmi last year where you get him to the combine and he's like, man, like what are you doing? Like
The guy's been a terror this year.
And you get him to Washington and some good coaching, and he's the highest graded rookie offensive lineman in the league, according to Pro Football Focus.
What a value pick for them.
And like, to me, it's just, and that's just on the offensive line. Those are 3 names on the offensive line that were underdeveloped, undercoached, undertaught, that basically got by on their own abilities alone and nothing else.
Right.
And not Amade. I mean, Amade is still obviously a work in progress, but there are things, that's just one position group. So think of every other position group across the board on campus that has the same problems. All these defensive backs that there was that one class where you get like 5 or 6 defensive backs that are all 4 or 5-star guys. And none of them have developed into those all-conference players that
Anthony
we would have
Cook.
hoped for this season.
Anthony Cook might end up being the best one coming out of this batch because of, and this was a guy that was in the portal last year. A guy that might end up, when this is all said and done, being the one that has earned himself a legit shot at getting drafted and all those things, where like we've seen flashes from BJ Foster. We've, Jalen Green's not on campus anymore. Like it's, I don't know. I hate the notion of a lost season because coming into this game Saturday, everything that they had set out to do was still on the table. As bad as the Oklahoma loss was, a Big 12 championship game run was still in order. You beat Oklahoma State, you then essentially got a 2-game lead on them. And who else is there? I mean, and then you go to Waco and get if you can get a win there. This team was still in contention for a Big 12 championship. And being, you beat a number 12 team in the country, and you're hanging around that top 20 mark and competing for a Big 12 title in year 1. Those goals were still there, and at a place like Texas, and Sark understands this. You still have to win games. This is a fan base that is not patient. And he doesn't have a 10-year guaranteed contract like Jimbo Fisher, where he can just be like, I'm going to take my time building this thing out. And if you don't like it, give me $75 million in buyout money to tell me to leave. He doesn't have that luxury. He doesn't have that long of a leash. And it's concerning. It's concerning. And we mentioned this after the OU game. Recruits view these things differently than we do. I don't know I can't speak for these recruits. I can't, but the ones that were there yesterday, how do you process how that game went? Did you see it as like, oh, this is a not ready for primetime Texas team that lost to the number 12 team in the country in a hard fought kind of game that a few things didn't go their way? Or did they view it as, what the hell were the coaches doing here? Like, this is a winnable game. How did they let this one slip away another week in a row? Can't speak for the recruits. We don't know. But how does that message is going to, if this type of thing continues, I don't know. I mean, how can, like I mentioned earlier, I don't know how the coaches can continue to kind of like excuse it away.
How many times can you keep selling to recruits that, hey, this might not look great, but there's an avenue for immediate playing time? When
Sure.
a lot of these guys that some of these higher level recruits, well, I mean, they all think they're going to play in the NFL. Like that's I mean, but it's sooner or later this is going to catch up to Texas, where not only are you not putting out the product on Saturdays, but like look at the NFL draft
Well, that speaks for
and
itself.
the lack of Longhorns that have been drafted that aren't just, either freak athletes or that got there because of their own ability, not because they were this bright shining star that went from a freshman that showed a lot of promise to an all conference player as a junior or senior. Sooner or later, the hey, that looked a certain way, but that just means you might be able to play right away. And again, we don't know what the mindset of some of these recruits, and they might all think that they're the solution. But how much longer can you depend on that
Right.
without developing these players and actually putting that product on the field year in and year out? And that's why they hired Steve Sarkisian, was for the recruiting, to get the guys on campus, because he is an elite recruiter. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, no, for sure.
You say whatever you want about Steve Sarkisian, he's an elite recruiter. And that's one of the reasons why they brought him here. And you see the success that he had at Alabama as a coordinator, and that, you get that rub as somebody that's able to put people into positions to be successful. And now we're 7 games in now into his tenure here. And outside of the Texas Tech game, because you can throw Rice outside of the Texas Tech game where they just lit the place on fire, the TCU win was a good win. But again, like you mentioned before we came on the show, they let that team back into it when they had absolutely no reason to.
Yeah, they let him hang around.
Let's give Steve Sarkisian some time here to get some of his guys in, to get some of his culture established, because it's very obvious that the culture, if you've been paying attention at all, the culture on this campus is still, let's roll out the helmets because we're Texas. And, then he talks about how hard the practices have been. How the practices have gotten harder, as how like the last parts of our practice is the hardest parts of our practice. And these guys probably aren't used to that. They're probably not used to being, having their asses handed to them in practice. And that may be something that they're trying to overcome as well. But we got to see how this season plays out. Let a coach establish his own culture before totally writing him off. But the early returns, Kerry, they're not there for me, and I don't think for anybody else.
My concern is that the development pitch, which is a good pitch, like that you can be a better developer and develop players and get them to the league, is a long-term process. And you can pitch development, but that takes a few years to truly develop. Let's say this 22 class that's going to be coming in for Sark in the spring. Those are true freshmen. How long is it before you show their full development potential? 3 years? So in the meantime, you need to win games. Because like you can develop. I mean, if you can be an ace developer and show that like, hey, you come to campus, we're going to develop you and get you to the league. But if you're only winning 8 games, these top recruits can go somewhere else and get developed and be in contention for titles. So it's kind of like
Yeah. Well,
that's the
this
whole
this
thing.
is
It's like development takes time, and that's as great of a pitch as it is. It takes time to do that, to like
and this
fully
is
show it on paper and say, look at what we can do with you.
yeah, I agree, and this is my counter to that. I agree with you. Steve Sarkisian has been willing to put Xavier Worthy into positions to be successful and to maximize his talent.
Right, correct.
And that's
Yeah.
I know that's one example, and that's pretty much all we have to go by. But if you're that talented and he can get you on campus and put you into positions to be successful immediately, it raises everybody up around you.
Absolutely.
And that's the only counter that I can make to your argument right now, is that if you're that talented, again, Bijan Robinson, 21 carries, 135 yards, 2 scores, 3 catches, 38 yards, another score. He was the entire offense. He's the best player on field. He's going to be the best player on the field for the rest of the season with either team, period. He's that dude.
And next year.
Yeah. And if you have that guy, if you have a couple of those guys, because there is no game changer on the defensive side of the ball right now. None. Overshown was in street clothes, and he's not that guy anyway, but he's the best that you got.
Exactly.
And so if you can get these guys on the field, Sarkisian has shown he's not afraid to this isn't Mac Brown not willing to put freshmen in Oklahoma. This is not that anymore. We're past it. And Sarkisian will put guys on the field if they're ready. And Xavier Worthy is obviously that talented where he can put them on and say, go get it, X, let's do it. Like the stats didn't show yesterday. He still had 5 catches. But I mean, like, again, you're dealing with a banged up quarterback, an offensive line that is not good at all, and a game plan that sort of seemed to go the wrong direction. But Worthy is that dude. That's my counter to that. And will it happen?
Yeah.
Can it happen? I don't know. And that makes your point even more solid, is just because there's just so much uncertainty wrapped around that. But if Sark can because right now that recruiting class is ranked in the top 3.
It is.
And again, it's not, now it's basically like just hold on until signing day with the way that this is looking like this season might go, because there's still plenty of time for these guys to go another direction. I'm thinking that this is still going to end up regardless of what happens, that this 2022 class is still going to be, it's going to be a top 5 class. And then you start to see next year, okay, is Sarkisian putting these guys into positions to be successful? And is that development? Sark knows that this timeline is not, he has a very finite timeline to work with here. He's not going to get 6 or 7 years to establish a culture and run through an entire recruiting cycle on campus. So he knows that he has a finite amount of time. Now, what does he do the rest of this season with what he has at his disposal? And I think that highlighting Bijan Robinson, highlighting Xavier Worthy is his way of showing these recruits like, hey, if you get here and you're that good, then people around this country are going to know who you are. And that's what, if you're a recruit and that's what matters to you, and that's the selling point, then make it happen. But your point about winning games, me, you, and Mike, especially Mike, has been just Mike was let's get to the game, let's get to the games, let's get to the games. Well, we're at the games now.
We're past the halfway point.
We're here. It's here. And we're starting to see exactly what the current state of this program is. I mean, we had a pretty good idea coming out of the last 2 regimes and the back end of Mac. We already knew what this football program was. Now, can Steve Sarkisian and this staff finish strong and still be that 8-win team that I thought that they would be? Or, because to me, that's, again, we thought that might have been the floor, 7 wins, 8 wins might have been the floor going in, and now I'm not so sure at this point. But can they finish strong and bring out the most of what they have on campus? I don't know if these players have, we'll see if there's pride in this locker room right now for the remaining 5 games of this season, because like you said earlier, man, there could be a couple more losses on this schedule, and they could come pretty quick.
Yeah. Next week is an off week, and maybe we can get, for next week's show, we can get a little deeper into this, back into the schedule, the final 5 games here, and kind of look at that. But like, I mean, yeah, looking at it now, from what I watched of Baylor yesterday and what I watched of Texas yesterday, that's a matchup nightmare for the Horns in terms of a really good defensive line in Waco, the way that their offense is able to move the ball. I don't like that matchup. And given the SEC situation and pissed off fans on the road, I mean, that place is going to be, we don't have a time for that game yet. It's Halloween Eve. That place is going to be, I mean, a really, bad environment for Texas to walk into. And how do they respond? They've got 2 weeks to prepare for that. But I don't like that matchup. And we'll kind of see where this goes. But yeah, I mean, if you would have, talking before the season, 7-5 to me feels like a disappointment. But that's really what this team is staring at right now. That's saying there's 2 losses in there in the next 5. That's not crazy.
No,
it's not crazy.
No.
And on the negative, the pessimistic side of it, like, is 3 out of the next 5 completely crazy? I mean, a 6-6 season would be kind of the worst thing that could happen in Sark's first year, to be perfectly honest, with like the kind of expectations and like the way that, I don't know, 7-5 is pushing it. 6-6 would be a nightmare. That's a nightmare scenario for Sark.
It's not.
But it's not out of the question.
It's definitely not out of the question.
But neither is an 8-4. This team gets hot. They rally, and they can put together some wins, and they finish on a strong note. But that's to your point. That's what this program is now. We're over halfway through the season, and we can look at the schedule ahead and go, we have no clue how the hell this is going to play out.
You have a quarterback situation on campus right now that as much as I like Malik Murphy, you've got a quarterback situation right now where you have to wonder, is Sark going to have to hit the transfer portal?
He might have to, unless something clicks with Hudson Card.
And again, Card's young. Like,
real quick on that, actually, before I forget, because I want to get your opinion on this. Given what played out yesterday, are they redshirting Card at this point?
It's very possible. I'm glad you brought that up.
With Casey's health issues and the way that the offense just went, the gas tank was on empty. At home, you would think would be an opportunity to maybe see if you can inject a little juice into that offense and into the crowd a little bit, bringing in Hudson Card, and we didn't see it. And if there's a health problem with Casey that lingers into these games in Waco and Ames and further, it seems to me like they're trying to redshirt Hudson Card. Which, is that a wise decision at this point? Like, why redshirt him again? Are you really thinking you're going to get 3 full seasons out of Card if he's?
I think he's reached his, because you can play 4 games, right?
Yeah, and he played in the. I think he had some snaps in the Tech game, right? And that would be it.
Yeah, so I think he's past that at this now, with playing, because he took the snap yesterday, the one snap when Thompson got pulled. So I don't know if that's, but it would seem to me like
maybe he didn't play against Tech.
Well, to the point, it's like, what are you waiting on? Yeah, he did. What are you waiting on? Is it a thing where you don't want to take confidence away from Casey Thompson? Well, dude, you're hurt. Like, you're banged up.
You still got to
and
play to win the games, man. And that's the
it
thing.
showed.
If you look at these other coaches, notably the game last week, didn't have a hesitation pulling the trigger on switching it up and injecting a little fire into the offense. And
Yeah, and I
if
think
those
that,
guys on that offense love Casey Thompson as much as they do, to see him get yanked out of that game, better light a fire under their ass. And otherwise, it was just kind of like there was no fire with that offense yesterday. And I don't know. That's a whole different tangent we can get on. We're getting
yeah,
close on time here a little bit, but like it's
yeah, but it's a good point to make,
something
and
to watch at least from here on out.
it makes you feel like Sark has that little confidence in Hudson Card at this point. I feel, to not make that move in
Which
that
I don't
moment.
understand. If that's the case, then he had enough confidence in him to name him his starter to open up the season.
I agree with that. But Sark seems to be a big what you show me in practice guy. Like, and that might end up being, when we're talking 3-4 years from now, that may end up being a
Being his
downfall, is because maybe Hudson Card just for some reason hasn't been practicing well or whatever. But I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that it would have, at that, what do you have to lose at that point? Like, try to inject some life into the
1 yard of
your
offense.
team, into the stadium. Yeah, what were you
What gets
doing
worse?
differently? So, I mean, outside of that opening drive in the second half, they had 12 yards the entire, 12 yards the entire rest of the half. So, I mean, like, what were you doing?
Why not
that you
switch
were
it up?
that you felt so confident in that you couldn't make a switch there? Like, I don't know. And I'm sure he'll answer that question. I'm sure that at some point that's going to be, and I was so frustrated. I didn't listen to any post-game stuff yesterday, like in terms of pressers. And I'm, tomorrow, Monday, we'll get his, or is there a game? There's not a game week presser this week, is there?
No, I don't think
So
I don't think we'll hear anything for another week. The Monday next week.
Well, that's unfortunate, because I would have hoped that somebody would have asked him that question about, maybe Evan Card play, and just to see what his answer would have been. But it's tough. It was tough to watch yesterday, because it's almost like it was the same story, different day.
Yeah.
In terms of how that game developed, and with a week of preparation here, you have to hope that we see this program turn the corner. But again,
and that's the thing. There's still an opportunity for Sark in this program to finish this season on a high note. I know, we were talking about, God, it feels like such a blur now, but all that, like, what was it, a few years ago when Tom Herman went up to Stillwater on a losing streak and put together a pretty good win up there? I think was that last season, where the Osai overtime winner in Stillwater, and it was kind of like, okay, maybe this is where this team can turn the corner and maybe save Herman's job or whatever. And they but like, this season isn't over. If this team can go up to Waco and get a win, that's a start, a big start, an impressive start, honestly, because then that would give more faith in them going up to, like, there's they might not be playing for a Big 12 championship this year. Probably not. 2 conference losses already, unless a bunch of insanity happens. But there's still an opportunity to finish out strong, go win a bowl game, and carry this thing over. And this is where this Oklahoma State game is not going to be the one that decides this season. The season narrative wasn't decided in Dallas last week. This end stretch is where the season narrative and the feeling going out of the season into December, getting the recruiting classes and into spring ball, that's where this is all going to be determined. And that's where this is it. This is where it comes down to crunch time. Got 2 home games left, and it's time to start putting it together. I mean, so we'll see. It's going to be interesting into the season, to say the least. So
wouldn't have it any other way, man.
Of course.
I would have it lots of other ways. But
yeah,
but the point is it's almost like we're used to this. We're used to the midway point of the season being like, hey, it's make or break time. What's this team going to do? Yep. And that's what Steve Sarkisian was hired to do, was to change that culture, to change that mindset. And again, me with my Freudian slip, saying Tom Herman earlier.
That's going on the 100th episode best of. Like,
Mark the tape.
Whenever we do a best of episode or whatever, that was an all-timer.
Hey, but again,
give Tom Herman a chance.
Jeez.
Unreal.
But again, like, it's just like you said, time's a flat circle, and that's where
let Charlie get a better offensive coordinator in here that's not Sean Watson, and this thing's gonna click. You just watch. The defense will be fine. That East Carolina coordinator, Lincoln Riley, sounds like a pretty good option. I think Texas should go after him. If Charlie can get a guy like that could run some air raid and run some like this, then they'll be flying, man. Jesus. Let's wrap it up before this gets really dark.
It could go down real fast.
It's too nice of a day to get this dark.
Absolutely.
Oh God. All right. Well, hey, let's, I mean, like I said, bye week for Texas this week. Let's hit on some Austin FC next week. There's a midweek game, trip to San Jose. See how that goes before Houston comes to town next Sunday, a daytime match at Q2. Weather should be great. Copa Tejas on the line, but we'll get into a little bit of Austin FC next week, and maybe we'll kind of see if we can start setting up that Running Horns preview show with Longhorn insider Mike Holland, and because basketball season's just around the corner, you can feel it in the air.
Yeah, literally, it's cold.
It's up there. Yeah, it's chilly.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's, so it won't be so depressing and Longhorn football heavy next weekend. At least we hope not. So, but anything can happen, even on a bye week. So
yeah, don't count it out just yet. It can
all
still
right.
happen.
But yeah, man, this has been good. Good show. And
I'm sorry, Sark. Oh God. Okay. All right. We'll see you guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking around. And don't forget to smash like and subscribe. We'll see you guys next week. Let's go.
ATX represent. Fatal, baby.
Falling on 6 on a Saturday. Can the drip and swing down?